Alright, let's continue with our 7 days of horror movie remakes with The Fog. Which, of course, we're talking about Carpenter pretty much at the top of his game. As far as horror goes, this was right between Halloween and The Thing. I think the only thing else in there was Escape from L.A. The year after this. But, yeah, so we're really at a... And then Christine was right after The Thing. Very incredible run right here from the late 70s into the early 80s. And, yeah, as well as a remake from 2005, which you'll see that I didn't even bother to obtain a copy of for this because, well, if you've seen the movie, I'm sure you know. So, I think it was hanging out on HBO Max or something, so I took another look at it. My first look at it since 2005. I gotta be honest with you. I didn't see this whole YouTube thing really happening in 2005, so I kind of thought that was going to be the last time I ever saw it, but I guess not. So, let's go ahead and talk about why The Fog is such an incredible movie, not for its genre and for really helping solidify Carpenter's place in it. And I guess, well... I'll talk about what makes this movie so good, and then we'll basically say, and to counter it, here's why the 2005 movie decided to do the exact opposite of that thing. So, that's, at least that's what it seemed to be. Because you've got, I mean, you do have Carpenter and Deborah Hill's names on it as producers, the remake, but to my understanding, Hill died right before filming, I think. And Carpenter has gone on record to say that his job on the remake of The Fog was basically to show up, say hi to everybody, and then go home. Pretty much verbatim, apparently, is what he said. So, that explains a lot. It's like, because it's one of those things where you're like, oh man, I have to give this the benefit of the doubt, like, and you wonder, like, oh, how did this happen? That's the only explanation you need. Carpenter was pretty much not even there. He just popped in to say hi every now and then. So that's how we got the 2005 movie. And so you look at, you know, Carpenter, who is a master of the genre, and you go over here to this non-existent place where the remake is, and you'll find the director of Blank Check and some MC Hammer videos. Who, by the way, is exactly who I would call for a remake of Fog. So, going into that, yes. I was kind of hoping to refrain. I was like, let's talk about the original for a while. Let's just bask in love and admiration, and then we'll talk about the remake, I guess. But it's like, if I'm gonna do the thing where I have to counter why the remake fucked up something that this did, we're just starting at the very beginning. So, and it was very, very, very predictable mistake to make too. Like, that's the really annoying thing. Is for starters, before we get the whole the original movie is only about an hour and a half. It's very short. And the entire first 12 minutes of that's a chunk of a movie when it's only an hour and a half, is devoted to this opening. This opening that doesn't really give us a whole lot of anything as far as what's going on, but it is like the fog in that aspect, but it's also given us a whole lot of that without giving us that. That's what makes it so amazing. Because we start off and we have this opening scene with John Houseman, I think it is, who's telling what's going on, the backstory, as a campfire story to these children. And something that I've talked about a lot when we've talked about horror in the past is that I really love moments in horror movies when people are just telling a story with no visuals, where it's literally like the audience themselves is being told a campfire story, and whatever's being told to you verbally by a character, you're kind of forming the images in your head, and what you're going to do with your head is significantly more terrifying than whatever is going to go on a screen, regardless of the mastery at work. That's been a known fact since the beginning of time. So, you watch this, and you're just listening to this story, you're forming the images in your head, and you're like, man, this is so terrifying, this is so vivid. And it's like, you know how they could fuck this up? Is if they tried to do it. If they tried to just recreate the backstory for whatever is coming out of the fog. So, you could just with that knowledge alone, you already know what the opening scene of the remake is. It's like, you don't even have to know anything else. Just know that you're being verbally told a story, and they're telling it vividly enough that you're creating it in your own vision. No. We have to make the backstory look very boring and give us this very generic-ass scene of the backstory and what we know of it. And then, yeah, after we get the backstory, in the original movie, we get this whole long sequence of things just sort of going crazy by themselves. Alarms are going off, and, you know, lights are going on off, things are just falling off of shelves, or bricks are falling out of walls, or whatever, and it's this really giant supernatural event that feels like it's taking over the whole town, and you're confused and disoriented, you don't know what's going on yet, because the fog's not even here yet. It's just like a warning, it's like a precursor to the fog. And we get the story being the campfire story and this for just 12 minutes of a short movie. That's a big, long time to really set up this feel. After we get the boring-ass visuals, very, very just... we don't even really see what's going on. There's no even point to even show us because of the way it's shot. It's just so dark and, you know, you just can't see anything. And so it's like, yeah, this is the ship thing. We get it. Then what do? Do we set the mood? Do we having everything go haywire all at once while just the beginning credits go by ominously? No, we set the mood by playing Fall Out Boy. Because when I look at this, see this image here? When I'm looking at this, I'm thinking about Fall Out Boy. That's exactly what's going on. Incredible choices being made by the remake. So, and yeah, it's one of those things also where it's like, it's not even a song to set the tone. It's a song to say, hey, it's 2005. It's like, what were they playing, like, what was being really overplayed on the radio at this point? Like, let's go back to 2005. What's being really overplayed on the radio right now? And like, that'll say, you know, what the kids are into, because that's our demographic for this. Like the whole PG-13 horror era of this time, that we had. So, yeah, let's just do that. That'll be our intro. That'll be what we set the tone with. I don't know. So, going on this now, let's talk about how the remake thought it was going to be clever and criticize the original movie, seemingly. And you could say, oh, it's a loving jab or some shit. I'm not really going to give much of the benefit of the doubt to the remake. So, yeah, there's some things in the original where you think, that's kind of weird. Like, Jamie Lee Curtis's whole presence in the original movie is... I mean, it's great because there's, like, so many, you know, carryovers from Halloween to this. Whether it be, obviously, Carpenter and Hill and all that, but you've got Jamie Lee Curtis, you've got Nancy Loomis, Charles Cyphers, and Nancy Loomis playing a character exactly like Annie, where it's like the scene where she and Janet Leigh are going to see Malone, and Janet Leigh says, you know, the yes ma'am thing, where it's like, you know, when you say yes ma'am, it sounds like screw you, and the way she says yes ma'am, it's like, I'm pretty sure Annie was resurrected from the dead and was just in this scene. Yeah, and of course our protagonist, played by Tom Atkins, is named Nick Castle. So, like, it all comes together in this really nice way. But with that said, yeah, I've always thought Jamie Lee Curtis in this was kind of one of those characters of, you could probably cut her out of it and not a lot would be there. To my understanding, one of the most memorable scenes in the movie, by far, is the scene with her in the morgue when the corpse sits up. And to my understanding, that was like a last-minute reshoot. So I guess the studio or somebody was complaining that it wasn't scary enough, so they, like, put more horror scenes in it. And they also had to, apparently, the opening scene with the campfire story was a reshoot also because they thought it was too short. So, it's one of those cases where a reshoot may have significantly improved the movie, to a great degree, but nevertheless, yeah, so the whole Jamie Lee Curtis thing, where she gets picked up, and at the same time, though, we can already tell with this first Jamie Lee Curtis scene that the tone has been set effectively. Because you see all this ominous stuff, you hear the ominous story, and then you see all the ominous imagery of stuff going off by itself. So, if that is established enough, when we see normal things, just normal mundane things, they're going to seem creepy. They're going to seem kind of off-putting. So it's like when he picks up a hitchhiker in the middle of the night, and it's Jamie Lee Curtis, and we know, oh, it's Laura Stewart, everything will be fine. You've been kind of shaken enough by this opening that your first thought is this a supernatural hitchhiker? Is this hitchhiker a ghost? Is it a murderer? What is it? And it's like, no, it's just Jamie Lee Curtis. It's fine. But then this whole thing where they kind of just sort of fall into bed together instantaneously is kind of weird. So the remake thought it was going to be all clever, and so we have the same opening where Tom Welling's driving and he picks up Maggie Grace, and she appears to be a strange hitchhiker like Jamie Lee Curtis was, but then it's revealed, oh, no, they're actually, you know, together. They know each other. And it's like, great. But then we get another moment later on where, before they fall into bed together, they make the joke where they say, hey, something about wild and crazy sex, they call it. It's PG-13. They're not actually... It's the usual kissing and backs. So it's the PG-13 sex scene, obviously. But when he brings up the idea of wild and crazy sex, her response, of course, is, with a strange hitchhiker? How ridiculous. It's like, yeah, we know. But, yeah, and then, of course, them falling into bed leads into one of the most unsettling scenes of the entire movie in this. And what does it lead to in the remake? Pointless ass shots, deafening flashes, where it's like, yeah, they don't just sort of set a tone that's like eerie and sort of like the way a fog is, where it kind of slowly rolls in. And it's like, that seemed to be Carpenter's whole approach, was like, oh, that's how fog moves in, so that's how my terror is going to set into this movie. It's just going to roll in subtly and then just sit here, and everybody has to sit in it and feel it. 2005, just flashing imagery and loud noises, whatever. And yeah, and we get the whole footprint thing too, where she sees the footprints on the ceiling and she follows them, despite looking completely unconcerned. I think it's revealed to be like a dream sequence or something. I think there's one scene in here at some point that's supposed to be like a dream sequence, and it's like, so, kind of, but for the most part, everybody just seems mostly unconcerned, regardless of if they're dreaming or not, especially the Maggie Grace character. Not to mention that the ass shots don't really end. We also get one with Selma Blair, which, for the record, not complaining at all about the sight of, you know, the asses of Maggie Grace and Selma Blair or anything like that. It's just the blatant nature of them. Feels very weird and sort of perverse on the director's end. Especially since Selma Blair's sort of big ass shot is a scene where she's hanging out with her kid. It's like, okay. So, going away from that, yes, I talked about how when Tom Hanks and Jamie Lee Curtis end up falling into bed, we get one of the most effective scenes of the movie, and that is the Hook banging on the door. And there's just a really perfect thing about... There's like so many layers to why this is a perfect moment. Start with the fact that we know the fog has rolled into town. We get the moment where it comes in, like, even just, they set up so much that the fog is going to be ominous, that you just hear words. Like I said, they set up with the campfire story. All you have to do is hear certain words in a certain context, and it can be scary without you even having to see anything. So when you know the concept of the movie, or if you've seen it and you know what to anticipate, just them saying, there's a fog bank about 20 miles out, or 25 miles out, or whatever it was. And that in itself is like, now you feel like something's coming. Just by hearing those words without even seeing anything. And then sure enough, we eventually see the fog coming. They even throw in a funny line, and it doesn't taint how ominous everything feels and how scary everything feels. When it's, where the guy looks out and he says, like, I don't see any fog. And then he looks back at it and it's like, oh, there's fog. And it's like, it's a funny moment, but it never breaks the tension of what's coming, because that would be the worst time to break the tension, but somehow they were able to slip that in, and everything still feels really, like, dooming. And not to mention, we also have the scene where well, first off, there is when we see the ship itself come out of the fog. And what I really love about this, and I talked about this with Halloween a lot, is that Carpenter's scores are amazing, and half the battle of an amazing score is knowing when to turn it off. And Carpenter knows when to turn it off. Like I said, we saw that in Halloween, and then there's the moment here where it stops. Like, it knows just when to shut the fuck up, when everything's gonna get really honest, and when that ship pulls in, and it feels huge. It's sort of a terrifying image, and then you see like the figures and the silhouettes and all that. The use of silhouettes in this also. And then, like I said, the moment when the second guy gets killed, and it's the lights are kind of like flashing in and out from the lighthouse, and we see this figure emerging from the fog and getting closer, and it's like, this is when I stop. You think about everything I just said, the ship coming out of the fog with the dark figures on it, the silhouette that gets closer and closer as the one fading light comes in and out, and a knock on the door in the dead of night. What I really, really love about the fog, first and foremost, is it pretty much represents just about every reason we're afraid of the dark. Like, whenever you really think about it, it's like, what is it about the night? What is it about the dark that's so terrifying? And anything that you're going to think of, any reason to be afraid of the dark, is illustrated in this movie. In the very first part here, also. And so, coming back to why I think the knocking on the door is a perfect scene, because we've set all this up that I just said. The ship coming in, we've already seen deaths and murders and all that. And so, there's a knock on the door, but at this point, in any other horror movie whatsoever, that knock on the door is somebody random. It's a character either like we haven't met yet, or something mundane, or something like that. It's not going to be the threat of the movie. It's not going to be something that's going to kill these characters, because these are the main characters. We have to have our fake out this early, that's why. So he goes, and then we see the shot of the knocking from the outside. And it's this gross-looking hand with a giant hook banging on the door. And so it's like, okay, now the second thought, after the first thought being, oh, it's somebody, completely non-threatening, somebody mundane. This is just introducing another character. Now that we've seen the weapon, our next thought is going to be, oh, there's an explanation for this. Oh, it's going to be, some guy that was using that for some reason or another and then just came to the door. Or it's somebody playing a prank. It could be one of the two. And it's only when the threat goes away, when he opens the door and the threat is gone and there's nothing there, and we know that it's over because the time has changed. And it's like, it's 1 o'clock or whatever, so that means everything goes away. So when when the threat goes away is when the fear sets in for us, because that's when it occurs to us what that actually was. And it's like, knowing it, being afraid of it after the fact, after it's gone, because that's the reveal of what it actually was. I can't think of another horror scene like that. Off the top of my head, anyway. So, I think that might be maybe the best scene in the movie for me. But there's so many as we go on here. And I love also that they set this up so well that when it fades out and we fade back into the next morning, when the kid's on the beach and he finds a piece of the boat, just after that whole opening scene, after the first maybe 20 minutes to half an hour, when it fades in onto that beach and we see that it's daylight, you can kind of feel like a sense of relief. It's like the feeling of, oh, you got through the night. And that's as an audience member. Like, you're safe as an audience member, or you should be. And it's so the way they're able to pull off that feeling, where not just the terror, but the feeling of relief when you know the terror is distant now, is equally impressive. So I really love that kind of stuff. Can't really think of a scene like any of that in the remake. I will say, if I have to say anything good about the remake, I know it's hard, I do think they managed to get a pretty good shot of their own when the ship shows up for the first time, when the ship comes out of the fog. And you see, like, the dark silhouettes on it and stuff like that. It's a kind of it's great the way Carpenter mastered it, but at the same, and it's like he made it as good as it could possibly be, to where it cannot be topped. But with that said, I also feel like the remake shows us that the image itself is so terrifying that it's kind of hard to fuck it up. Because it's just, if you don't completely fuck it up, it should work. So the remake did manage to pull that off. The only thing they did mess up with that is, naturally they felt the need, they had to play big music. Because of course they do. Remember how I said, like, the whole thing was like, that Carpenter shut the music off when it appeared? It was like, that's a whole other impactful thing. The remake obviously is just going to ignore that, because of course they will. Because 2005 horror, it's all about the loud noises, but, whatever. So, continuing on the fact that they continue to bring something to the original movie that they started off with in a great way was the whole idea of storytelling. So once again, we're going to get moments in this movie where we're going sort of down this sort of rabbit hole of, I don't know, lore, I guess you could say. So we get two scenes that are kind of happening parallel, where we're getting stories told to us. Where Nick is telling a story to Jamie Lee Curtis, and Malone is telling the backstory to Nancy Lewis and Janet Leigh. So here we come back to the whole campfire thing, where we're not getting, and it's almost like I've been so, like, my mind has been so jaded by shitty movies having to do the whole, oh, look at what's happening thing. It's like, oh, we don't want to bore the audience with dialogue, we gotta show them shit and throw shit at them. No matter how many times I see this movie, which has been quite a few times at this point, I'm always just waiting for, like, shitty scenes showing what they're talking about to start. And it's such a relief when they never come. It's always just Nick telling the story, just Malone telling the story. Once again, it's like a campfire story. It's like reading a horror book. We're just making the images in our heads, and it's this whole other way of imagination that can open up while watching a movie. And it almost feels like it's like you're sort of participating without having to really put much effort into it. Because the dialogue is, like I said, the dialogue and the storytelling is so vivid that the images are just kind of happening effortlessly in your head. And it's like, it's a matter of how, you know, scary in your mind that they are, that they're coming to life that way. And then obviously it's only then that we do get, you know, the jump scare where, like, the body comes out and stuff like that. And there are, I talked about how 2005 horror is like all loud noises. Much like the rest of Carpenter's movies, the jump scares are few and far between, but when they're there for a reason. One that I really like is usually the worst kind of jump scare is the fake out, where it's somebody that's not actually threatening that jumps out for seemingly no reason. But I do like the bit where Malone pops out and scares Janet Leigh, and she catches herself saying Jesus to the priest. It's kind of funny. So it's an old joke that goes back, like the priest getting shot in hot fuzz and yelling Jesus Christ. It's an old joke, but yet somehow it's funny every time. So 1980, 2007, now it doesn't matter. So yeah, and it's I think there was another jump scare I was trying to remember, and I can't, because I could say, oh, there's one effective jump scare in the remake, at least. Like, usually they at least master one, but I can't really think of one because the whole movie just sort of feels like noise. So I can't really go down that road. I think the only thing that can cross over here from the remake is talking about Malone telling this story, and the fact that he's telling the story so well we can make those images in our heads. Malone in the remake kind of just feels like Crazy Ralph from Friday the 13th, the guy that's like rambling but nobody's really listening to because he just sounds praised. So I don't really know why you'd go down that route, because it works really well when you have, like, you know, stoic Hal Holbrook here. Because the thing that Hal Holbrook does really well here is that he doesn't seem crazed in the way that this is not like a Crazy Ralph kind of way, but it does seem like there's something off about him. Like in the opening scene with the Carpenter cameo, he seems relatively normal, just sort of surrounded in this ominous sort of way. But when he's like telling the story, or when he comes out of the shadows like that, there's something there that's kind of like it sort of makes it off just a little bit, just in just the right way without being too much. And I think, and he does that like through his whole performance, which is great. So, going on to what I was talking about with other effective scenes that, you know, you could say are in both movies, like the hospital scene. So it's like, which one is going to master that better? That's obviously not even a question, but I don't hate the way the remake handled the morgue scene. Obviously, what I was talking before about it being one of the more memorable scenes of this movie is, I remember there was the first time that I saw the original movie, and then there was a pretty large gap in time before I saw it a second time, and then ultimately every other time I've seen it since. But the one scene of all the really nightmarish shit that you see visually in this, from them coming out of the fog and the dark figures and stuff like that and the ship coming out. The image that really stuck in my mind, like the most, like was the one thing I thought of when this movie was ever mentioned, was the scene in the morgue where like the arm comes out from under the sheet and then from underneath we see the legs coming down. That's a shot that just sticks. And they did enough to recreate that in the remake. The one thing the remake did that I actually like is the fact that there's like multiple bodies under sheets in this little area, and she's just sort of walking by them, and there's a little bit there where you're not sure which one is going to be the body that comes to life. That's not a bad idea. I don't. The execution didn't do it justice, but the idea is something that I do like. But obviously, once again, they're not even going to come close to this. And some other stuff we get in the remake mostly feels like filler shit. I think it's like 10 minutes longer than this one. Somehow. We got that whole subplot with the friend that doesn't die in the beginning. And there's like this whole thing where it looks like they're gonna assume he's guilty, assume he did it, and then that just kind of doesn't go anywhere, and then he just becomes a useless character. But then we get like scenes where they're trying to tie in this whole thing about everybody being a family member of the people 100 years ago that killed them, and in the whole history, and that all of that just feels like. It just feels forced. It's a cute idea, I guess, to have Maggie Grace and who the Janet Leigh character is now to actually be mother and daughter in this movie, because even though they weren't related in the original movie, they were played by Jamie Lee Curtis and Janet Leigh. That's a nice idea and everything, but like I said, this whole thing about tying everything to everybody being family here, I don't know, because you got that shit where Maggie Grace has to figure out, oh, this person, and I'm related to this person, and which brings us to our tired and predictable ending. But it's where I talked about the hitchhiker being supernatural in the original movie, and it's like, oh, what if that's the case? But of course it's not. Wow, they kind of just really couldn't help themselves. Like, just everything that's good about the original movie just literally had to be changed and be the opposite. So that's... Yeah, so you have the whole thing where she like falls on the water. She drops like that tape, and like I think even later in the movie, like somebody mentions how stupid that is, and it's like when the movie is starting to call itself out, and it's like you're basically irreparable at that point, and it's like even if you're trying to be tongue in cheek, it's not that kind of it's not. There's nothing tongue in cheek about the remake. With the exception of it taking some digs, but I think being tongue-in-cheek is more endearing than, taking jabs or whatever, so, whatever. There is, there was another image that, in the remake that stood out. I'm really struggling to remember the remake here, guys. Just hang in there. There is the scene where they're, like, on the beach, and we see, like, the whole dining table with the chairs just sitting there on the beach. And I feel like there's an image, just that image alone is very haunting. It feels kind of shoehorned into the movie, but it's horror. You can stop and appreciate just a good image. So it did accomplish it. So it's got a couple of good images. They more or less did fine when they brought the ship out of the fog, and I like the dining set on the beach is really just, it's very like sort of dream-like in this sort of weird way. This sort of surreal way that works, but that's pretty much all it's really got going for it. Everything from then on, we get the boring backstory stuff where it's the same as every other PG-13 horror movie, where it's like you figure out you're not sure if there's ghosts or whatever, then you figure out there's ghosts or whatever, then you go and you look up shit, and you just read the backstory out of ancient books, and then the climax gets here. That is the whole setup of every horror movie in, like, the 2000s. And this is clearly no different from that. So, they try to do some modern updates. Like we have, I haven't even mentioned Adrienne Barbeau yet. And she's obviously Selma Blair eventually got this part later. Having the radio station in the lighthouse is such a cool idea, and, like, having this whole set up with her where I love that she's like isolated through like the whole movie. I think she has one scene with her kid, and then after that, like it's she's just in the lighthouse by herself, and just every now and then on the phone with Charles Cyphers. And Charles Cyphers in the remake is now a dude that's on like I don't know what they were calling it in 2005, but we'll say Zoom or FaceTime just to, just to keep going. And the trouble though is that when they update it to be present, when they update it to be 2005, they're not even doing that right. I swear to God, there is a scene where the power goes out, but yet they're still talking. Their faces are still on the computer and they're still talking to each other. And she's like, oh, wait a minute, if your power's out, why is your computer still on? And he says, batteries. And it's like, that's great. And I love, by the way, that they actually took the time to make her ask, how is this working? Technologically, how is this working? And he's like, oh, my computer's still on because I got batteries. Who the hell knows why his internet's still working? I don't. I don't think the writers do either. I don't think anybody involved in this movie did. His internet just works. I guess that's what it is. So, I mean, I could be wrong. When the power goes out, my internet goes out. I don't know if everybody else is the same way, but I'm going to assume. But, I don't know. Maybe it's me that's not technologically up to date. I have no idea. So, what I also really love... I can't remember. I guess the remake kind of keeps up with this, I guess. But what I really love about the original is the way that they don't really show the figures that are in the fog. It's basically not till they're at the church that we get a somewhat decent look at them. But even then, they're just so sort of like... deformed. That they're still just... It's still this feeling of them being shrouded, even when they're, like, not actually in the fog. There's still something, like, when it's, when they're, like, busting down Andy's door, and we're only just getting, like, shots of their arms, or when they're attacking the truck and surrounding the truck, we're only getting, like, really quick cuts that just barely show just enough to show that they're there and what threat they're posing in this moment. And then we still can't quite get a look. You can even, like, slow it down, and you're still getting, like, barely any looks at them at all. And I really do love that. But no, they're just, like, straight up, you know, fully, completely visible by the end of the remake. They have, like, whole conversations with them, and the whole thing where they take Maggie Grace and all that. It's just kind of pathetic. And I do think it's funny that I was... given the director shit when we started for the remake because he did like MC Hammer videos and Blank Check and stuff like that. I think he did something else that was like totally not this, anything like this. And then it's to my understanding that he hasn't really worked as a director since, because it's not outlandish or over the top to say that it's because of this movie. Sometimes movies just kill a director, and it's not surprising at all this would be one of those. So that's pretty much where that lies, and this one had a director that went on to do a couple more movies after this. Maybe they were forgettable movies, I don't know. What Escape from L.A., The Thing, Christine, you know, Starman, I think was shortly after that. Yeah, I don't know who the hell this guy is, but, you know, same page and all that. I don't know that there's really anything else I need to say. I feel like we got there. I want to say, when I was talking about earlier, I think the top of the lighthouse scene where Adrienne Barbeau is under attack was also kind of a reshoot to add sort of more horror to it. So I'm actually really interested in what the original cut looked like without, like, it had so little horror in it from the sounds of it. But like I said, just the way they set the vibe was so effective that I feel like it probably does still work, but I also just kind of love the movie the way it is now. I don't know that it would work another way now once you're used to this one. So, yeah, that's all I think. I'm trying real hard here to think if there's any other thing about the remake I can say where it's like, oh, that's not terrible. Oh, okay. The babysitter, the woman that's watching Andy, obviously her death in the original is terrifying because we don't really see much of it. She's just kind of pulled out of the door, but it's like Andy in the other room not knowing that she's dead yet is like really. Yeah. So like that's great and effective without having to do a whole lot or show us a whole lot. But I mean, with that said, I do think there is this really sort of cheesy CGI effect when she dies in the remake, and it like whittles her down to a skeleton. But when the skeleton's actually like laying there and steaming, it's I'm pretty sure it's practical. So when the skeleton's just laying there without the CGI, that actually looks pretty good and pretty gross in a good way. But yep, there you go. I think that's your compliments for the remake. The ship shot is decent. Would be much better without the score. The table shot on the beach, very good. And a practical skeleton. Congratulations, you used a practical effect, and now I have to congratulate you. Because you've set the bar that low. So, yeah, I think that's where we are. And I don't think I need to say much else about the original. Obviously, we know how great the original is. And hopefully whatever I said before this summed up the reason why. So, at least a little bit. So it just experiencing Carpenter in itself is the way to go. I can sit here and talk about it all I want, but to like see it and hear it and experience it is what you need to do. So I think I can leave this at this, and we are going to continue with these horror remakes. Like I said, I'm shooting these way in advance and way out of order, so I don't know what the next one's going to be, but you will by literally the next day. So I guess I can leave this at this. So whatever the next thing is, I think that's it.